Hi everyone, welcome. Down here in my wormery, there's a common theme for the most part. If you look at most systems, even here underneath this cardboard, you're going to see that there's a piece of bubble wrap here, bubble wrap there. Bubble wrap is not what I cover with exclusively. Sometimes I just use plastic bags, like you see over here. But when we get over to my mixed red worm bin, we decided last time we checked in here 10 days ago to remove the plastic coverings because it did seem like there might be a little bit too much moisture in here. My mixed red worms, by the way, are red wigglers, RW, ENCs, European night crawlers, and Indian blue worms. So one of the telltales of this being perhaps a little bit too wet was the abundance of springtails, something I don't really see in my other bins. I started to wonder if the big bloom of springtails might have been caused by perhaps excess moisture. So 10 days ago after feeding, we left the plastic covers off. And who knows, maybe by this time things have gotten back to a more realistic state. But I've got some food to give them. We're going to check the dryness, decide whether we want to recover this with plastic again or keep it going the way it is here. And we're going to give them some food. So let's get this thing up on the bench and get started. What the worms are receiving today is a whole bunch of apple peel. It's all been frozen. And besides that, I've also got a day's worth of coffee, plus a couple extra coffee filters, or at least one extra coffee filter, as well as a couple soiled paper towels. So it's a pretty routine feeding. And I also want to include the mosquito dunks solution, which I think is also a pretty good preventative measure to make sure that flying insects don't make themselves at home in your bin. And I got to admit, I've been rolling this out into all my systems gradually over the past maybe a couple weeks now. And it does seem like this stuff is finally beginning to work, which is a good sign. I don't really see any signs of the flying insects. But I did whip up a couple gallons of this stuff. And I figured, right from the get-go, I went ahead and I applied this stuff in all my systems. And then I've been making my rounds as I feed each system. I've been breaking this stuff out to apply a little bit here and there. I thought I saw a flying insect take off. The flying insects do like the moist material, and we figured besides possibly reducing the number of springtails in here by drying things off, maybe we would also start seeing fewer flying insects, although this is the stuff that I think is what really gets rid of the flying insects. It looks to me like a lot of this worm chow that I sprinkled out across the top never really got a whole lot of action. Possibly because it just wasn't moist enough to intrigue the worms. So I think the best bet with this stuff is going to be to simply blend it in. Yeah, things are pretty dry. Although when we make our way over here, you could tell that this stuff is much more heavily broken down. This is the stuff that used to be in the small container that the worms used to live in prior to us upgrading them to this slightly larger home. So this stuff is almost all finished castings. Here and there you see some other stuff blended in here and there. But I have been trying to keep it separate so that it can remain pretty clean of debris. So there was about this much material added, and then we shoved it all over, and then we added even more. I've just been gradually kind of trying to build the overall volume of the space up to give the worms more room to roam around in so that they feel really comfortable. And, sometimes when worms sense that they've got plenty of room, they'll have a tendency to mate and try to fill that available space with baby worms. And I guess one main reason the worms used to live in small containers was because the population was very small. I think it was only a few dozen when we first started out. And luckily the population has bounced back pretty nicely. So let's just dig in here. I figured it's probably a good idea to see if we can blend in a lot of the stuff that's just been sitting dry out on the surface and kind of give it a break and submerge it down into the more damp material. I am starting to get the sense that further drying might not be a good idea. It might be good to just sort of stop the drying process and just let the system continue at this point with with the existing moisture and not lose any more to drying. But as long as the material would probably benefit from a little stirring around, I figured I would do that and try to get the more damp stuff out to the surface and the more dry stuff down under the more damp material. And I do believe that a lot of this stuff you see here, all these little white specks, I believe these are still springtails hanging around. So I'm just kind of wondering if this mosquito dunk solution might also help reduce the springtail population in here. I really don't know if it's a very good idea to try to continue with the drying to try to reduce their numbers. I wouldn't want to make the environment so dry that it would become inhospitable for the worms. And it already did seem like the top ½ inch to an inch was already so dry that no worms were hanging out. They were all down at the lower levels. So let's shove over this really heavily broken down material, and then we'll have ourselves a little bit of extra space that we could play around with here to use as kind of a mixing area, so we can kind of blend in the dry with the damp material, see if we can get things kind of leveled out. And I would imagine just by blending in the more dry materials with the more damp materials, we'll just continue creating a more dry environment overall. And who knows, maybe at some point the number of springtails in here will be reduced, but who knows. Maybe it wouldn't hurt here and there just to give another shot of this stuff now that the pump is working again. You saw how difficult it was in the beginning. I would hit the trigger and then it would spray and then it wouldn't reset. But I guess once I get it going, it seems to work. I was even squeezing the bottle to try to help it. Yeah, lots and lots of springtails. It seems like the springtails were pretty comfortable simply retreating down into the more damp material down low to get away from the dry stuff. The flying insects, on the other hand, I don't think have that option. If the material on the surface dries out, then they'll probably just go looking for a different place to hang out. Although I hope that the spray that we've been putting in the BTI mosquito dunks solution is going to help reduce or maybe eliminate the threat of my systems getting overrun by the fruit flies and gnats. So we're still seeing lots and lots of springtails in here. I wasn't expecting some sort of overnight fix for that. In a way, I did sort of expect that they might still be here. These, I think, might be bits and pieces of the sunflower that we fed them quite a while ago now. There was an entire sunflower placed in here. And they've been working it down gradually. Here and there I would bump into large chunks of it still holding out, but I think even last time there were only little fragments of it here, little signs of, like, you know, kind of fibrous threads or bits and pieces of the flower, but nothing that you would really be able to identify as an entire sunflower anymore. Like here too, it looks like a big chunk of it kind of holding together still. There again, I assume that that's what that is. I'm not 100% sure though. So yeah, I'm starting to wonder if maybe returning plastic coverings here would be a good idea, and maybe start, you know, banking on the fact that hopefully the BTI solution that we just sprayed in might help, you know, reduce springtail numbers a little bit. Because whatever springtails are alive in here already, I think they'll just stay, you know, they're going to remain. It's just that the BTI, the mosquito dunk solution, really affects the development of larvae. So these adult springtails will mate, they'll lay eggs, but it's the larvae that come out of their eggs that are going to be unable to develop beyond the larval stage, and that's where the reproductive cycle will be cut off. It feels to me like I've made the explanation of how the mosquito dunks works in about every video lately that I've been showing this stuff, but I have been showing it in every video because I have been applying it to every one of my systems. And here too, I'm starting to think that these little white specks might actually be bits and pieces of the worm chow we applied last time. These might not be springtails, but these probably are springtails. It seems like there's a mix of some springtails, some leftover worm chow from last time. So, yeah, I think This is bread. They got potato peel last time, and I'm definitely seeing bits and pieces of the potato peel itself, the very outer peel. But any of the actual potato that was still stuck to the peel, seems like it's all been nibbled away, and they've only left the very, very thin peel of the potato. So they did a really good job, and I guess the outer, very outer peel of the potato is a little bit tougher for them to work down, and that'll go in time as well. But all the softer stuff does seem like it all got nibbled away. It's all starchy stuff, and starch is basically a sugar, right? So it's not too surprising that they went for that pretty quickly. And here's half of a lime. Looks like the worms are not put off by lime. Citrus is sometimes considered by some as a no-no in the worm bins, and I don't buy that. You put a lime in, they're all over it. So here and there you see little pockets of worms kind of hanging out, probably, you know, going after the moisture, not so much whatever it is that's there, probably mainly for the moisture that's present within the material. But I have been gradually blending the more dry stuff together with the more damp stuff, hopefully creating a more, kind of like a, you know, something that's got a more consistent moisture content to it throughout, rather than little pockets of dry, little pockets of damp. And in a way, at this point, I'm kind of hoping that the mosquito dunk solution that I've been spritzing in here is going to help us reduce the springtail numbers. Not that the springtails are going to cause any sort of a problem or that they're going to disrupt or disturb the worms. I'm not worried about that, but it just seems a little bit unusual to me that this one system, for whatever reason, has so many of them, and in all my other systems it seems like I don't even see any. So I just like the idea of kind of getting this system to the point where it too has, you know, maybe a few springtails hanging out still, but not as many as I see in here. There's just way too many in here. I'm not sure if we really managed to bring all the most damp stuff from the bottom up, because it feels to me like I'm still hitting pockets on the bottom that are still kind of undisturbed and very damp. So I'm just still tilling around and stirring a bit more here, but I think we're almost at that point where it's time to give them their feeding, and we'll probably just cover up with plastic. I think that sounds like the right thing to do at this point. A little bit of drying might have done the system good, and even though there's still probably more moisture in here than is necessary, I really don't want to see the system further dry than what we've already had happen here. And the stuff with, you know, the dry material having been blended into it, I believe will also dry a little bit just as a result of that. So now we didn't really leave a place for the food to go in, so let's nudge open the far edge of the system, and we're going to drop in the nice variety of apple peels. All these different types of apples. My mom made some apple pastries, and she used a whole variety of different types of apples. So you could see like yellow, red, more of a kind of intermediate color. So she tried to incorporate the flavor of numerous types of apples into that pastry, and it was delicious, I must say. All right. So now I've got a number of things like this. It's a coffee filter, and you might have noticed in the beginning we had a coffee filter sitting out on the edge over here, showing us where we last fed. Well, since this one's already been in the bin for a while, serving the function of feeding zone indicator, let's put it to a more noble function by becoming bedding down in the feeding now. And here's a soiled piece of paper towel, another one here, or maybe it's a napkin. It's a little bit smaller here too. I got a good bit of just paper that we can use as bedding, but I think we can also kind of maybe mix up the bedding by including some leaves, and I've got a box of leaves that we can include. So why don't I bring that over too, and we'll start out by sprinkling down some leaves. We'll drop in some of these pieces of paper, and we'll save this new coffee filter to be the replacement feeding zone indicator. And then we'll be able to drop in the apple, and we'll get this system set up with its feeding. Oh, it looks like I might be ready for a little bit more leafy material. Once we use a couple handfuls of this down here in the feeding zone, we might be starting to run a little bit low. Luckily, I put a whole bunch of this stuff aside when I collected the leaves this past autumn. So I've got tons and tons of leaves. So I could be pretty generous with this stuff. But I think that's adequate right there. And there too, that stuff's pretty dry, you know. I mean, I'm almost wondering how it's going to do. Maybe once we put the food in there, I don't know, I guess as this frozen apple begins to thaw, perhaps it'll release a little bit of moisture down into the feeding area, perhaps hydrating this dry material a little bit. And I guess if we cover up with plastic, perhaps all that excess moisture in the material out here will start recirculating throughout the system, and that moisture will get shared with some of the more dry materials, and hopefully we'll see this stuff get a little bit damp just from the recirculating moisture underneath the plastic covering. And I think I've got a piece of bubble wrap we could use for that. So let's see, this was the one we thought we would put down into the feeding area, but it's kind of large. Why don't we tear it in half so it fits down in here a little bit better. Then we can begin piling in the yummy foods. So this is a pretty good bit of apple. My mom had guests, so she made a whole bunch of this pastry. And you know how things are when they've been frozen and then they thaw. This stuff, I believe, is going to kick out a good bit of moisture as it thaws, hopefully. And as it thaws, it should get kind of gooey and soft. And then you would think that the worms would just come right over and eat it all up, 1, 2, 3. But something about apple, I don't know what it is about apple. It really does seem to take a long time for worms to eventually get into it and start eating it. So I've got a funny feeling if we come back in here in another 10 days or so, we might find lots of leftovers and not a whole lot of progress on that feeding, but that's fine. I'm not too worried about it. All right, very cool, very cool. I've got, actually, you know what? I forgot I had another coffee filter right here with the coffee in it still, so guess what? We'll go ahead and we'll use this coffee filter as yet more supplemental bedding. And it's probably good too to somewhat cover up this delicious apple here, because that too in itself could probably draw critters that might want to come in here and try to make themselves at home. So maybe by covering up with the coffee filters and with the coffee itself, maybe we can sort of mask the scent of the delicious food hiding right beneath it. Because I don't want to have all kinds of weird critters coming in here trying to take advantage of the situation. However, you know what? I think let's see if we can just grab some of this somewhat worked material and use that to cover up with even more thoroughly. That too just seems like a sensible preventative measure to make sure we don't get any sort of curious passerby insects noticing that there's a delicious apple feast sitting over here for them to tap into. Hopefully we can kind of mask it from them. And I can be pretty thorough. I'll just take a piece of plastic, maybe a plastic bag instead of the bubble wrap. I think with that I can be a little bit more thorough in covering up. And then that'll really keep the moisture in, and hopefully it'll circulate and dampen all the dry things here too. I guess these two pieces of paper, once the plastic covering goes on, will suck up some of the moisture within the system. So let me see if I can find a plastic bag that we can get this thing covered up with. There we go. In fact, this might even be the plastic bag that had been covering the system. I don't know, it might have been bubble wrap at this point, I can't remember anymore. But it does seem to be the right width to provide edge-to-edge coverage all the way around, leaving virtually no room for any airflow at all, or drying. And for that matter, no airflow to allow the yummy smell of apple to escape, to draw any sort of curious critters over. Over here, if it remains uncovered, I'm not too worried about it. Those are castings that probably do a pretty good job on their own, hanging on to their moisture. So, I think we're in good shape. I've got a few things I got to take care of cleaning up and putting away, but I'm not going to keep you around for that. Before I go though, really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.